Welcome to Studio 5326. Here's a quick preview of what the two finished tables will look like at the end. So here's the first table after it came out of the form. The epoxy's all cured, and here's a look at the bullet table. I'd actually gone ahead and poured a 1/4 inch base of epoxy first, so it'd have a little good buffer when I go to machine in. I want to actually be machining into the bullets. Here on the form, you can see I've used some caulk around the edges. This just saves a little epoxy and prevents me from having to flood the entire surface of the table. I also caulked around any significant cracks or knots just to stabilize the wood. That way when I went to machine it, it would be nice and solid and should last for years to come. Again, here we go. We can see here the epoxy has been poured. It's looking pretty good. Went in there, let it set, and then I go in with a torch and pop the bubbles. Here I'm just inspecting to see if there's any bubbles. Then I'll let it dry for about a week, and I'll be ready to start machining it. I've got the Woodpecker slab flattening mill. Here, just looking to do enough to get it basically flat on one side. So I'm doing basically as thin a pass as I can, and then flipping it and do the other side. Here I'm starting with, depending on the severity of how bad the wood was burned during the flattening, I may start with a 40 grit and then work up to 100 grit. So here's just a rough sanding. I'm really just looking to move quick and get rid of all the burn marks. All the finish sanding will be done later on. Here I'll use pencil marks on there just as a guide to make sure I'm sanding evenly. Again, I just spent all the work flattening it on the flattening mill, so I want to keep it as flat as possible. Here I'm just doing a little water pop. I do that in between sanding coats to raise the grain. It really improves your finish. If you do this, and it gives you a little preview of what the epoxy is going to look like, lets you see any scratches, also shows you how the wood's going to look once you get a finish on it. Here I'm sanding up to about 100 grit, making sure when I'm sanding the epoxy to wipe all the dust off. In between, keep an air compressor on hand to blow off my sandpaper, as this will build up pretty quickly and you'll get these little pigtails in your epoxy that are a nightmare to get out. So you definitely want to have that air compressor on hand when you're doing this. So here a little trick I found out is if you actually wet sand your epoxy using those Abralon pads, it gets rid of the scratches pretty quickly. So now that I've got that kind of rough sanded to about 100 grit, I'm going to go ahead and clean up the edges with my track saw. So again, you can do this in less passes. I think I took 5 passes on here. I'll speed up the camera just so we don't have to sit through all that. That epoxy is pretty dense to cut through. But yeah, I mean, take your time here. You spent a lot of time to get to this point. No point in messing up the table. So what I'm doing here, I get everything squared up, and then after that, I'll actually use my track saw to cut the bevel on there. Here you can see there's a spot, a low point, so I just use my Shaper Origin to machine that out and match the grain up for a little patch job. Once it's glued up, taking my hand tools and just flushing it up as close as I can, then I will use a combination of sanding, maybe some glue and sawdust just to really blend that in there as best I can. So when you're going to match something like walnuts, actually can be pretty tough to match perfectly, but if you can find a piece from the same piece of wood, that's going to give you your best option. Here for this finish, I'm using the Osmo finish on this table. On the other table, I'm using the Rubio Monocoat. So with Rubio Monocoat, you really only need one coat. With this Osmo, I think I put on 3 to 4 coats with this one. So this one I'll finish I'd already done the bottom. I flipped it over. Now I'm doing the top of it. So I get it out there, then I'll get my applicator pad, get some finish on there, and then I can start buffing it. So after you buff it in, you get it to where you like it. let it dry for at least overnight. Most of the time I let it dry about 24 hours. Once it's not tacky, I'll go ahead and give it a light scuffing with probably 320 grit, and then apply another coat. And you can keep doing that until you're satisfied with the sheen. Here's a little showing those Abralon pads. Here I'm just sanding out the epoxy, looking to see how clear I can get it. So your clarity level is going to be dictated by how many bubbles were left in it whenever it cured. So if you can get those out, and then the next is how many scratches can you get rid of. The more scratches you can get rid of, the clearer it is. And here you can see it is pretty clear. Finishing the bottom first. Again, this one's a Rubio Monocoat, so on the application of this finish, you're using this little trowel to spread it on. You could also use a credit card, pretty much anything. You could use your hands. I actually use my, wear gloves on this stuff. It does get, not 100% necessary, but definitely helps you stay a little bit cleaner in your shop. And sometimes I'll just use the finish with the glove to put it on the edges. There you can see I'm doing it there. So here you're just trying to rough it in, making sure it's soaking in to all the wood pores. And once you get it all on there and completely saturated, you'll take your microfiber towel and wipe as much off as you can. I think I heard on another video somewhere before that you actually cannot wipe too much off. So once you get it on there, just keep wiping, then wipe, and then wipe some more. So you'll get a little bit of resistance where it's sticky. Again, you don't want to let this stuff sit for too long before you do this. So, immediately after you get it on there and you're covered and it's saturated into the pores, go ahead and wipe that off. Now here when I'm flipping, I'm using the Bench Dogs, and I'm putting microfiber towels on there just to, try to minimize the damage that gets done to the finish as it's curing. I can always just touch that up with a little extra Rubio Monocoat once the top is dry and I have it put together if needed. So here, taking a look at it after it's dry, starting to look pretty good. Pretty happy with this. I sent a preview picture to the customer, and man, they were really excited with how this thing was looking. I was actually pretty skeptical about the bullets in the table before, but after this, I thought, man, it turns out pretty cool. There's a look at the walnut table after the finish has cured. So you can see this one has a little bit more sheen than the Rubio does, just because the level of finish that's built up on there. And I think it's also this one, it was actually the Satin Osmo. I just kept putting finish on there, and then once it was done, I actually buffed it out to about 1,500 grit, just to give it a little bit more sheen. Really happy with how this turned out, and you can see the patch job in the corner. It actually turned out, I like how it looks. Definitely can be hard to match walnut perfectly and make it invisible though. Now building the base, I'm using a dado blade to cut the tenons on the stretchers. So they'll be tenoned, kind of a through tenon into the legs at an angle, and then the stretchers will be half lapped together to form kind of a little X. So my idea here was it, kind of looked like spider legs on the table base. And then in each of the legs, I've got a floating tenon that I'll machine in using my Shaper Origin, and then that will actually be, the table will actually float on that. So I don't know, a little detail I came up with I think looks pretty cool. The table's actually floating above the base, so you can kind of see the joinery. So this table saw sled I built, I just bought a few parts from Rockler and found a YouTube tutorial on how to square up the fence and built this thing. Took me a couple hours, but it was well worth the build, just for stuff like this, or I mean any of your cross-cutting stuff you want to do on your table saw. This makes it pretty quick and pretty safe. So here I'm actually using a dado blade, so I have a removable insert that You can see kind of in the picture here to the left of the blade there would be another piece of MDF there to give me a zero clearance cut if I was using a standard blade. Here for the dado cut I have that removed, so I can put that piece in and out without messing it up. So a little bit of a process, but well worth it in the end. There we have it. So after that, I'll go ahead and flip it around and change my angle and match it up and do the other side, but the process is essentially the same. It's kind of a look at the legs, and here's all the stretchers done, and you can see the legs sitting there behind them. So my next step would be to glue those legs up like so. I've got my half laps cut, and now we're ready to put in our floating tenons. So built this little jig with some shaper tape to allow me to quickly pocket out some mortises. I found some scrap maple I had laying around and cut them all to the size I wanted, and then I just type that shape into my shaper origin, put it where I want it, and let the tool do the work. This thing is a huge time saver for little jobs like this. I mean, this thing has a ton of capability, but if this was the only thing I was going to use it for, I would have still bought it just because of the time saving here. I mean, typically I'd have to, my setup time would be pretty significant doing it with traditional means or doing it with hand tools, but we're talking in, a couple minutes having a perfect fitting joint. All right, here we go. I tested the length and width, and one thing when you're using a router bit, you will have those rounded corners. So if your tenon or whatever you're putting in your mortise does not have rounded corners, you'll need to take your hand tools and just square up your corners. So pretty quick work. Maybe takes you another minute. Clean those up, and then there you go. A little test fit. I'm not sticking it all the way in because it's super tight. I think I gave it 2/1000 of an inch of clearance, so that'll give me just enough room for some glue without cracking the wood. And here we go. Just a little glue, a rubber mallet, a few taps, and we are ready to go. It's pretty satisfying whenever it goes according to plan and turns out looking that good. There it is, all glued up, ready to go. Did the same thing on the other base. Here's the bottom of the bullet table, and here it is all put together. You can see the base has the floating look. There it is. Match the same finish. Whatever finish went on the top also went on the base. So this one has the Rubio Monocoat, and the other one has the Osmo finish. Both great finishes. You can tell the Osmo definitely has a little bit more sheen to it. And you can also keep adding coats to build that sheen and then buff out the final one. Thanks for watching this video. Drop a comment. Which one did you like better? The walnut table or the pecan bullet table?